Hello, Mateus Thrive Nation. Got a very, very special show today. We're going to be talking about toxins and detoxing. Two things that have been thrown out there in this health and medical field. I've got Dr. Jill Carnahan on the show. She is a medical doctor, a functional medicine specialist and expert, a person who has not only overcome breast cancer, but is thriving after breast cancer. She's overcome Crohn's. She's now not just a survivor, she's a thriver. She's a podcaster. She's now an actress on a documentary. This lady is a special, special human being. It is just such an honor to have someone on who's just sharing knowledge, who's an educator. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jill.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. I am absolutely excited to be here with you.
Brilliant. I want to hold the audience now with two testimonials, two stories about toxicity or mold, maybe possibly a male or female that people can relate to.
Yeah, so gosh, I could talk about 1,000 patients. I will just frame this with one interesting fact. So many people come in and they say, Doc, I just got diagnosed with MS, or I just got diagnosed with lupus or autoimmune thyroiditis, or my cognition is declining. I'm 50 years old and I can't think anymore. I can't perform. So what often happens is the patient walks in not knowing that mold or toxicity is the underlying issue. And I want to frame that because if you're out there listening and you have all of a sudden you're in your 50s and your cognition is declining, you think, oh my gosh, my grandfather got Alzheimer's, I'm going to get Alzheimer's. 1 in 3 early diagnosis of Alzheimer's is related to mold. So the stories I'm going to tell you now are not people coming in saying I have toxicity or mold. Almost no one ever does that. It's them coming in with a real complaint, autoimmunity, cognition, fatigue, migraines, you name it, the common things that we see. And then I find out underneath the real issue is mold and toxicity. And I wanted to frame that because, again, most of your listeners are going to be like, oh, I don't have mold. So they're not even going to pay attention. Yeah. And it's important to know if you've got a new diagnosis related to autoimmune or immune or from memory, it could be mold. So stories. First one is a couple that I saw for years and have known them for probably 8 years. And maybe 4 years ago, the woman started complaining of hormonal issues, excess estrogen, tender breasts, fibrocystic breast, heavy menstrual periods. She was in her late 30s, so it wasn't a time around perimenopause. It was just abnormal bleeding, lots of hormonal, and of course the PMS types of symptoms and the mood symptoms and the sleep symptoms that go along with it. So she was having mostly hormonal issues. The male complained of decline in testosterone, decreased libido, excessive weight gain, craving for alcohol, cognitive decline. And these are very two different, male and female presentations. And as I talk to them and ask them about their history, and one thing I do with toxicity is say, when did you last feel well? When did things change? Because often if there's a change in your environment, a move to a new city or a new home or a new place or a new workplace, those are clues to say what's happening. And as I started to question them, I realized that they had had a remodel, a leak in their bathroom, some issues. And it sounded to me like maybe the master bath had a mold issue. And I told them they needed to get an inspection. We did testing, and the testing I did, blood work and urine testing, confirmed that they had been exposed to mold. But it literally took them 2 years, because what often happens in this case is, oh, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of money. We don't want to really face the real issue. And I didn't see them for about a year. And they came back recently and they literally both sat there in front of me and said, Doc, you were right. We opened up our master bathroom and finally found, and there was massive black toxic mold where the grout had not appropriately been sealed. And for the years that they had owned their home, it had been building up behind there in the drywall, the mold. So all that to say, both of their symptoms were related to that mold. We took care of the mold. I treated them for toxicity and they both got better. But they were also, this other common thread is denial. I was there too, because it's a big deal and it threatens our sense of safety in our home. And it often costs lots of money. So anyone out there who may be suspicious, but the truth is you can't get well until you address that root cause. So that was the couple. The other person I saw, I've also known him and his wife for many, many years. He came in, he had been in his teens in the hospital. He was an Olympic grade skier training for the Olympics. So very, very athletic. All of a sudden he started having ulcerations and sores in the back of his mouth. They looked at Behçet's, they looked at Crohn's colitis, they looked at all kinds of diagnosis. No one could figure it out. From 16 till 36, 2 decades, he suffered from pain, fatigue, ulcers on his back of his throat and his mouth and his gut. No one could figure it out. And he sat down with me, and again, I'm nothing special, but I did listen. And I think I listened a lot more than the doctors had before. And so often, as we're taught in medicine, if you listen to the patient, they'll tell you where to go. And he told me about camping and hiking in the woods and how he remembered a tick bite and how he remembered some of these things. And we put together the story and I did the testing. It ended up, and this does relate to toxicity, believe it or not, that he had undiagnosed Lyme disease that was affecting his immune system. And all of these other things like old Epstein-Barr, old herpetic viruses were causing the ulcerations. So his immune system was basically really trashed, and a bunch of old infections, viruses, and Borrelia, and some co-infections were causing weakened immune system and fatigue and all the symptoms. But what I was going to say is around the time where things got really bad when he was young, he had a massive exposure to mold. And I think in that case, mold weakened the immune system just the notch enough to cause those infections to pop up. So often what I see is I see someone present with a chronic infection or maybe a chronic fatigue related to reactivation of Epstein-Barr. But the real issue is they moved to a new house, the mold weakened their immune system. And to put this in perspective, one of the common mycotoxins we test is called mycophenolic acid. Mycophenolic acid is the main ingredient in a drug called Cellcept, which is used for organ transplant so that they suppress the immune system. Like, it's a known, probably the most powerful immunosuppressive on the market, and that can come from mold in your home. So there's my stories.
Wow, two incredible stories, and life-changing stories. And I've never really thought of this, of denial, your safe space, and you don't want someone coming in and checking out your house, and if there is mold, but possibly because we're talking about that, the mold expert that comes in there. How do you know if they're legit, if they know what they're doing? What equipment should they have? I think of myself, I'm also a geobiologist. I went to Australia. I can measure high frequency radio waves, electromagnetic fields, and electrical fields on the body and how they respond. What should people be looking out there in terms of a mold expert?
Oh, this is such a good question, because you can literally go to a weekend class and call yourself a mold expert. So there are regulations, we call them IEPs, indoor air quality professionals. And there's an IACA, I believe it's indoor air quality. I can get the link for your podcast afterwards, but it's an organization that certifies, but it's still kind of a wild west out there. And so the difference is you can have a lot of people that maybe were contractors, kind of know building materials. You do want someone who understands construction, because it's all about construction defects, or basically we think about this as an envelope around us, and it's barrier penetration to that envelope. So say there's a leaky window, there's condensation on the window, the attic isn't sealed from your main area, and there's condensation or differences in humidity in the attic. There is a leak from your fridge or your washer or dryer or somewhere under the floor behind the wall where you can't see it. And 95% of cases have places where you don't see the black toxic mold. It's behind a wall, it's under a floor, it's under the carpet. It's not usually visible. Some pump may leak, and people think, oh, let's just dry it out. But if it's been more than 48 hours of damp on a porous material like drywall or carpet or anything that can absorb water, it's going to be a nidus for mold unless your humidity is less than 20%, which it rarely is. So back to the professional, how do you find a good professional? The difficulty with my kind of patients that I see is I am seeing mold doesn't affect everybody equally. It's not an equal opportunity employer. So there's about 25% of the population that has a genetic issue with detoxification, and they have more trouble tagging antigens like toxins or mold toxins in the body, and basically identifying for the immune system to excrete them appropriately. So you can have a whole family or a workplace where 2 or 3 or maybe 25% ideally is affected by the mold and very, very sick from the mold. And the other 75% don't even notice, or maybe they have a stuffy nose or a little congestion, but their cognition is fine, their immune system is fine. And the difference is this innate immune system's ability to tag. Now, I'm framing all that in a remediator or an inspector because many inspectors have no idea how mold affects the human body, and they might come in and tear out that wall. If they first thing you would know is if they don't use a negative air pressure system where they put up a containment and use an air scrubber and take that air and actually blow it outside while they're doing the remediation, if they're not using the appropriate barrier protection on themselves, which means an N95 or an N99 mask, so the kind with the big charcoal air filters on it, and a complete suit, like a HEPA kind of suit, they're not protecting themselves. They're probably not going to protect you. That's number one. Number two, if they start to open up a space or do inspection and they're not containing that, what happens is mold is like dried flower arrangement, and it'll sit there back behind the wall. And yes, it's excreting mycotoxins, affecting you and the environment to some extent. But the moment you open that up, it's like flicking or blowing that dried flower, and it just blows into a million fragments. Those fragments, even if they're dead, can still affect the innate immune system. We can still react to those innate those particulate And the mycotoxins they produce are like VOCs, they're volatile organic compounds. I know you know about this in your world. So that means they're less than 2.5 microns, which is like the size of a virus. So they can embed in paper, in porous materials in your home. And again, say, for example, I have a problem behind this wall. A good remediator would contain that, would take out any particulate that would be porous that might have been damaged by water up to 2 feet past. So they'd be sure and have a good margin. Then they would check that air quality before they take down containment. If it's clean, there's nothing in the air, then they take down containment. And then after remediation, here's the important part. They need to actually fog, which means this oil-based fog will pull down particulate, like all that dead flour kind of stuff. And it's the dried mold particles, and then actually clean. And those are the two things that create an environment that's safe for someone to get well in. And many remediators don't even know that that's part of the plan or part of the process.
Sure. Wow, that was informative. And I think, is that also a case where if you're down at the coast or there's a lot of humidity and it's high and your hygrometer is showing like above 50% often, is mold a bigger issue down at the coast?
Absolutely. Two things though. It's all about, if we have like some of these LEED certified buildings, they're amazingly efficient. They're terrible if there's mold inside because they're so efficient. There's no air exchange, and dilution is the solution to pollution. Which means if you have air exchange, if you can open your windows, even if you can't remediate, you're often going to create a better environment because you've got some outdoor air exchanging. So the particulate and the level of toxins is down. So on the coast, the good thing is most people can open their windows. There's lots of free air exchange. There's negative ions. There's some benefits. But the bottom line is what you said is, if your home has a humidity above 50%, it's almost guaranteed there will be a mold problem. So you need to keep humidity. I actually keep it below 40%. And I'm in Colorado, so it's usually below 30%. It's very low. But you need to keep your home below 50%. Or you're going to have a mold issue somewhere.
Sure. And then if you high up in sort of, we've got like 2,000, meters above sea level, then it gets so dry, and then dryness can cause an issue. So you're caught between maybe like a 40 and 45% humidity because it gets too dry, then you start getting sinus issues. So it's quite a tricky, precarious place.
It is, and you can use dehumidifiers for the excessive humidity problem and humidifiers, but any sort of, I've seen 2 or 3 multi-million-dollar mansion. I'm talking like very, very expensive homes that had a natural humidity system installed, and it was full of mold. So even in these super expensive homes, and this is a misnomer too, the number one type of home we see for mold issues is newer builds. It's not old homes. It's not that those can't have them, but people are always surprised. They're like, oh, well, I own $1 million mansion or multi-million-dollar. It doesn't matter. Mold is not discriminate. You can have a beautiful, beautiful large home and still have a massive mold issue.
Now, is Dr. Jill going to invent sort of a device, a biohacking device that you just take into the room that can just pick up whether you got black mold? Is that on the cards for the future of health?
Ooh, I love that. Right now, we have is like the VOC meters, which you probably know about. Those are helpful, but they're not discriminate. So if you have new carpet, you're going to have VOCs from that, off-gassing from other sources. You could have formaldehyde. And in fact, what's interesting, I live in the zones where there's been lots of wildfires, like California and Colorado. And what happens after the wildfires is we get massive particulate and issues with toxicity in the air. That's just as bad as mold. It's not mold. So, but particulate meters and VOC meters are already there, but they're not perfect because you can't really tell. That would be a brilliant biohacking device. Is there mold in my home?
Yeah, simple. Okay, so tell us about, I've done functional medicine for the last, probably 15 years. I had Jeffrey Bland on the podcast. We had Dr. Shaw tell us about the organic acids test that we've been doing for a long time. What is your process of testing? Someone comes in with brain fog, they come with memory loss, maybe they come with early onset sort of cognitive decline. There's just so many symptoms where people don't really know what's happening from a toxicity point of view. So what is your auditing process?
Yeah. So once again, I'm going to frame this because I think it gives a big picture. In functional medicine, I'm like a detective like you in this realm of like finding root cause. And what I found, functional medicine is fairly simple. There's usually 2 things that are contributing. One is toxic load, which is the main topic of our conversation today, and the other is infectious burden. And even the stories I told you at the beginning, they combine the 2 because so often they're interplaying. And those 2 things can create immune system deficiency or excess, either autoimmunity or deficiency. And they can also create some inflammation. And those inflammatory things lead to all kinds of things. So, but plus infectious burden. And the reason the toxic load is so critical is that that's the thing that decreases immune system and allows those old infections to pop up. And so it's almost like whack-a-mole. We all have had chickenpox as a child, or maybe Epstein-Barr in our teens. And so many of these infections we get, They stay in our system. They lie dormant. They never bother us again. And the perfect thing that people understand is shingles, right? Shingles is just reactivation of an old virus you had at 5 years old. So even if you think this is kind of hard to believe, well, why would we get viral reactivation? Does that really happen? Yes, it's shingles, right? Like that's a perfect example. And you're seeing epidemic post-COVID, people getting shingles because they're weakened immune system. And I give that example because what could happen is if you get in a moldy home, all of a sudden you have a cold sore, you have shingles, you have fatigue or Epstein-Barr pop up and cause thyroiditis. So those old viruses can pop up. Same with when you were 12, you were camping and hiking in the woods, you got a tick bite, you got Borrelia, but you're fine. If you have a robust immune system, Lyme doesn't hurt you. You don't have to treat every person that has a positive test. But what happens is when that bar, that limbo bar of the immune system weakens and drops, all of a sudden these old things start to pop up. So that's the frame of someone who's coming in to see me. And the common things are, like you said, cognitive decline, fatigue, or just unexplained symptoms that no doctor's been able to figure out why they're having these symptoms. And autoimmunity, I think we're on the edge of a tsunami because we're seeing more and more autoimmunity as well. So what do? Gut is critical because gut is our immune interface with the world, and all autoimmunity starts in the gut. It starts with that barrier from the gut and enterocytes, which line the gut. They're like tiles on our bathroom wall, and we can think of the in between transcellular junctions as the grout. When the grout gets damaged or dissolved or permeable due to toxic exposure, mold is one of the biggest things that can create permeable gut. And so can poor diet, all glyphosate, chemicals, pesticides, all the things we get exposed to in our environment can damage our gut. They can damage our microbiome. Many of these things, like you had Stephanie Seneff on the show, glyphosate doesn't really work by damaging our cells, but it damages our microbiome. It preferentially decreases the strains like lactobacillus that protect us and allows things like Clostridia to predominate, and that's dangerous to our microbiome. And I'm saying this related to autoimmune because I'm going to check the gut. I start with a stool test to check permeability, digestion, absorption, infection, things like parasites, yeast, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So I'm looking at the gut first. I do a stool test. Number 2 is organic acids, which I know you've also gone into depth. One of my favorite tests in the world is organic acids. It's a urine test. Docs can order it. There's many companies that do it. And it gives us a snapshot of all the metabolic processes that are happening. So we go back to the biochemistry and we look at neurotransmitters, we look at vitamin markers, we look at overgrowth markers from excessive yeast, Clostridia, bacteria, and we look at glutathione status. There's so many things we can see on organic acids. And then I do blood work, and I do a very large panel. I use LabCorp, Quest, hospital labs. I try to do it through insurance. And what I'm looking at there is immune markers. So I'm looking at cytokines, innate immune system things, TGF beta, MMP9, MSH, antidiuretic hormone. I'll also look at the cytokines. I can do panels for natural killer cells and CD4 versus CD8 and the ratios. And then I'll look at old infections. So I'll do Epstein-Barr titers. I'll do CMV, Coxsackie, HSV1 and 2, varicella, and on. And I usually screen for Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, some of the main Rocky Mountain spotted fever, some of the main. So I kind of screen for infections. It's not perfect, but it's an easy way, and you can usually do it through insurance. And then I'm looking metabolically, uric acid, homocysteine, fasting insulin and glucose, things like A1C, and then your basic metabolic liver, kidney panels, blood counts. And then I'll do thyroid and all of the hormones. So that's in a nutshell. We do a lot of labs, and that's kind of the basic workup you would do for someone with toxic exposure. Now, the one thing I didn't mention is actually testing for toxins. And there's 2 or 3 companies now that do urinary toxin exposures, and it's a milieu of everything from phthalates to parabens to volatile organic compounds to organophosphates to herbicides, pesticides, and glyphosate. Right now, the 2 main companies that do that are urine only. We used to have a blood test, which is better because like some things are better done in the blood, and you have to kind of know what you're testing. For example, cadmium is better tested in the urine. Lead is better tested in the blood. So you kind of need to know what you're doing. Some things can be tested in routine labs like the heavy metals, but mostly right now for ease of patient and at least to screen, I'm doing urinary toxicity testing.
Sure, that's extensive. So you need to really go to a good functional medicine doc, or contact me, the South African Society of Integrative Medicine, or a lot of docs in South Africa that you can connect with, especially if you've got these sort of difficult symptoms that are not going away with continual sort of treatments from traditional docs. So that's the auditing process. Now we're talking about detox. Let's look at light first. I think that's important. And then air. And water, how you detox from malillumination, how important that is, sunlight, the different frequencies in terms of our detox protocol with our mitochondria. So maybe just expand on those different areas, and let's start with light.
I love this because no one's ever started with light, and I get so excited because right next to me is a PMF mat, which is electromagnetic spectrum. Love, love, love that thing. It's been my game changer with my deep sleep, with my vibrancy, with my healing. Like, it is a powerhouse. PMF, for any of you who don't know, is pulsed electromagnetic therapy. NASA has used this technology. I mean, it is well studied. Some of the big pearls about this are it can be really good for calming the nervous system. So like when patients or when myself have had a mold exposure, I'll use a low level, like a Schumann frequency, which is like walking barefoot on the beach, kind of getting that grounding on the earth. You can actually get that from the mat. So like, for example, when I used to get a mold exposure, I'd have wake up in the night and have some tachycardia, like 120 out of sleep. And I'm like, oh, I don't feel well because my heart's beating so fast. Or my legs would ache. And I think that was just due to the vascular effects of mold. And I would get on that mat at a Schumann frequency, and 20 minutes, I'd feel back to 100%. So love PEMF. I love red light therapy of any type. I use it on my face for my skin. I use it on my brain. I have a Violite. There's many other devices out there that actually do mitochondrial enhancement. I have an alpha level wave, and I love using that before I speak or before I write or whatever. And so that red light to the brain, red light to the face can increase collagen. So I'm a huge fan of, I have a wand even right here behind me. Just randomly, this is a wand that does red light. So you can see it turns red on when you put it up against your face. And I have a device that, oh, here we go. I was going to say, see that red light there?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's on the face, and then I can actually put a mask on the face. I love light therapy. And when I get up in the morning, what I've been doing is experimenting with going off of caffeine. I only drink about a cup a day, so I'm not dependent on it. But what we want to do is bring down those adenosine levels, because caffeine blocks adenosine. And what happens is, as soon as we stop caffeine, that fatigue that was being suppressed by the caffeine molecule, the adenosine is still there. And as soon as we stop using the caffeine, when the half-life's up, all of a sudden adenosine level's still back there, and we get tired, we need a nap, we get sleepy. So I've been experimenting with basically sunlight, a lamp that's sunlight spectrum when I first get up in the morning, because that will actually lower adenosine naturally without using caffeine. So what I do is I get up a half hour earlier than I normally do. I put that sunlight light there. I sit in my chair for 30 minutes, no coffee. And I'm starting to feel really, really good without coffee. And I love my coffee. So that's a fun thing, because it's that sunlight in your eyes stimulates the retina and actually lowers adenosine. And it's kind of a hack, because caffeine doesn't lower adenosine, it just blocks adenosine. So all that adenosine buildup, and our adenosine builds up from our morning, it's low. It's the opposite of melatonin. And then as we go down to get ready to sleep, it rises and it tells us we're tired and we need to sleep. So if we block it with caffeine, it's still there. It's underneath. And then the caffeine goes away, and all of a sudden we're really, really tired. So I've been playing with this, bringing down adenosine with light.
Must let me know how it goes. And what about infrared sauna? Are you an infrared sauna fan? Do you use the incandescent bulb? Or what type of saunas do you use?
Yeah, so right next to me here, I have a red light bulb also I can use for like a low back or an arm or a joint. I love, and that's an infrared bulb. I love infrared sauna. It's probably the cornerstone of detoxing from mold, because you get this penetration deep into the tissues. It increases enzymatic detoxification processes. It helps your liver. And as we know, we can breathe out toxins, we can sweat out toxins, we can pee or stool. All those ways are the ways that we get rid of toxins. And one of the most powerful ways, especially for PCBs, phthalates, parabens, and mold toxins, is sweating in a sauna. So part of my protocol for almost any patient getting well is start with, and I usually say, because these are really sensitive patients, I say turn up your sauna to 130 degrees. 130 to 135 is the ideal temp for detox. The higher doses are like, say, 145, 150 might be better for sweating or weight loss, but for detox, 130 to 135 is optimal. And what I'll do is I'll have them set it to 135 and get in when it hits 100, and then start with 5 minutes. And then the next time 7 or 8 minutes, and the next time 10 or 12. And they just gently ramp that up, because then they stay longer and it gets closer to 130. And then when they hit 130, 135, as they work up to that dose, they can stay in there 30 to 45 minutes, 5 times a week, or as much as they tolerate.
Brilliant. We had Dr. Terry Walls on the show, and your podcast, which we'll put links to, and on my podcast. She speaks a lot about infrared sauna. I'd love to hear what you take pre-infrared sauna. Do you take any binders from zeolite or bentonite clay, or what do you do? Phospholipids. There's a lot of research now on phosphatidylcholine and what it does from a detox point of view. What are your sort of precursors to infrared sauna?
So the very basics would be some sort of glutathione or precursors. So just plain old liposomal glutathione, oral, IV, transdermal, inhaled, any source. But you don't, if you take plain old capsule glutathione that's not acetylated or liposomal, it is disrupted in your stomach and you won't really get the benefit. The stomach acid impairs absorption. So you need to have a liposomal under your tongue, or IV, or inhaled, or S-acetyl glutathione, some form that's able to bypass that. Phosphatidylcholine is like oil change in our car. It's our lipids that make up our brain and our body, and every single cell has the phospholipid bilayer, which is how our cells communicate. And if that is sticky from trans fats from our diet, maybe fast food or French fries or some of these things that aren't healthy, or from mold or toxic exposures, changing that oil in our car or in our brain can happen with phosphatidylcholine. And I love PC. I take it every day. Sometimes PC, because you're changing lipids, you're also throwing out a lot of toxins. So just like the sauna for super sensitive patients, you need to go slow. And if your lipid bilayer and your permeability of your gut is massively disrupted, you actually want to wait to do PC until you do a little healing on the gut, because it'll just cause so much. It actually causes translocation of lipopolysaccharide and some of the bacterial components that cause inflammation in our gut. So again, the timing of PC is important, because if you're really sick, really toxic, your gut is destroyed, PC is probably going to take those toxic metabolites and cause them to cross over into the bloodstream more quickly. We don't want that. So start by healing your gut. 2 to 3 months later, you can add PC. Prior to sauna, I mentioned glutathione. Other things, if you can't tolerate glutathione, are precursors: N-acetylcysteine, R-lipoic acid, vitamin C. Glycine is the rate-limiting factor for making glutathione, and it's also good for healing from glyphosate. It's the thing that's depleted with glyphosate toxicity, and then glutamine. And those are kind of core things that if you can't do, when I was really, really sick, I couldn't tolerate glutathione. So I did vitamin C and NAC and glycine. So, and that worked. So you can do precursors. Some people will do niacin, which is kind of a flush inducer. It's a B3, and that flushing can make you sweat more. So if you're really wanting to get a sweat on, you can take a little bit of niacin, the flush version. And then the binders are key, because you're basically mobilizing toxins. And when someone talks about either going too fast, having a Herxheimer reaction, getting sick from treatment, or even if they're detoxing too quickly, I always say that's a sign. We have 2 parts of detox. We have mobilization and we have excretion. Mobilization is easy. We take glutathione, we sauna, we exercise, we do all these things. That's easy. It's taking the toxins from our tissues where they're stored in the fat and getting them mobilized into the blood, so our liver, our kidneys, our skin, our lungs can detoxify and get them out of our body. But the second part is actually most important, and that's excretion. So you have mobilization, you have excretion. Excretion's harder because this involves lymphatics. It involves your bowels and bowel movements. It involves urination and your kidneys, and it involves your skin and your sweating ability. And the lymphatics are huge, and people forget about lymphatics. And all of those pieces are actually really important, because when someone has a Herxheimer or a detox reaction, it means they're mobilizing faster than they can excrete. So all you need to do is shift the equation, improve excretion. But again, that can be hard, because you need to do lymphatic drainage, hydrotherapy, cold water therapy, getting the lymphatic stimulated, dry brushing, lymphatic drainage remedies, homeopathics. All of the naturopaths have taught us some of these kinds of things because they know about this, they do it. PMF, I think, would help lymphatic drainage but it's also more subtle, because it's not just taking a pill. You have to, so if you're having trouble with too much sauna, you want to work on the excretion. And back to the binders, what I do is usually recommend after your sauna, take a binder: clay, charcoal, zeolite, glycomannan, chlorella. There's a bunch of them. You can combine them, but I'm a huge fan of glutathione precursors, making sure you're excreting, and then also doing binders after sauna.
So you do the binders after, and then you do the assisted help with mobilizing the toxicity in the different areas. Okay, so that's very, very interesting. What about looking at things like zeolite? Do you look at that, or specific binders that are a little bit softer? Do you go into a lot of that with regard to your practice?
I do, because I have a real gestalt, not only clinically experienced, kind of like you, I've been doing this 20 years, but also just there's a binder compendium where some of the research has been put together about which metabolites, like for example, Catoma globosum is best bound by charcoal. And same with any tricosylene, which is the really toxic black metabolites from Stachybotrys and Gatomium. Now, granted, other binders work, but charcoal is a game changer for those. If you're looking at something like gliotoxin, which can be from Candida, but also can be from Aspergillus, sometimes things like chlorella or glycomannans or Saccharomyces boulardii, those are actually potentially better binders than charcoal, and clay works too. So I definitely do. And if someone has just mold exposure in general and they have a little bit of everything, I'll usually combine clay, charcoal, and zeolite. And the reason for that is clay and charcoal work. They're very gentle. Zeolite's really good for metals, and it has a little bit more affinity for some of the other toxins. And that combination is pretty gentle and works really, really well.
Is that after sauna? And if someone's not sauning, when do they take those binders?
Oh, great question. So the standard, if you're not sauning, glutathione, empty stomach, 30 minutes before food or supplements, and just because you're getting it liposomally, but you should be able to, after 30 minutes, take whatever else you want. Binders want to be 1 hour either before a meal or before supplements, or 2 hours after. My personal routine is I'll get up early, go to my sunlight light, and the very first thing I do is walk out to the kitchen and I'm half asleep, and I take my binders with a large glass of water with lemon. Lemon also alkalinizes the system and helps. And then by the time if I have my coffee or don't have my coffee and have my light, an hour or so later after I've done my meditation, then I take my supplements, have breakfast. But I like that. Binders usually first thing in the morning, at bedtime if you don't take anything else, but you need an empty stomach with binders, because these are electrostatically charged particles, and their job is to grab onto those toxins almost like a magnet would be with lead filings across a table. And if you take them with food, they're going to bind to food and not be as effective. It won't hurt you, just won't be as effective.
Brilliant. Let's move on to nutrition. Let's start with the soil and how important that is. I know you've got a rich history being brought up in farm country. And, what about the soil, and what should people do, organic versus non-organic? And sometimes it's a cost sort of like analysis, because people can't afford all sort of pasture raised, pasture finished, grass fed, grass finished, So what are your thoughts there with nutrition in the soil?
Once again, love where you're going, because I did grow up on a farm. I'm daughter of a farmer and many generations of farm. I'm the first doctor in the family, but there's such a correlation. And I actually write in my new book, Unexpected, I talk about, we used to say that autoimmune disease starts in the gut. And I said, I think now we should say it starts in the soils, because the soils are an early reflection, and the changes therein are a reflection of what happens in our microbiome. And a lot of the stuff that we're getting, the lack of diversity in our microbiome, the effect of Roundup and glyphosate on our microbial contents of the gut, are because our soils are becoming depleted, and they're becoming overused, and they're becoming over fertilized and herbicide and all that. What happens, for example, with Roundup, it's a mineral chelator. And so it was originally found as a mineral chelator. And what it did was, when you put it on these plants, it chelated the minerals that the plant needed to survive, and it would kill the plant. Well, it does the same thing in our gut, and it chelates like zinc and magnesium and some of the minerals, molybdenum, that we need to survive, and that are more importantly, that our microbiome needs to survive. So what happens is then our microbiome preferentially gets disrupted, and that affects our whole health. So like I said, I talk about this autoimmunity beginning in the gut, but I think the soil is most important. And what's happening is the topsoil, that rich nutrient layer, is being depleted and not replenished. And so many places, even in Illinois where I grew up, the topsoil is being destroyed. And like, that's our bread of life for all of our universe, all of our world. Yeah. And we're destroying that. We're not taking care of it. And as we throw chemicals on it, it's so parallel to the microbiome, because as we take drugs and chemicals and that, we're lacking diversity in our microbiome. And diversity is what allows us to overcome illness. It's almost like, I always talk about the Ireland potato famine years ago. All the farmers found this one potato seed that grew great potatoes. So they all bought the same seed. And then suddenly a blight came in, because there was no diversity. There was one type of potato. Everything got eradicated. And in our gut, it's the same thing. When we have multiple different types of microbes, that diversity is increased. We're more resilient to disease of any type. And as we use glyphosate and eat processed foods and our soils are depleted, we're depleting the diversity, not only in the soils of the microbes that give that rich, nutrient dense soil on the top, but also our guts. And it's massively affecting our health.
Brilliant. And we had Joel Salatin, the regenerative agricultural hero in the States, who's shown how beneficial regenerative agriculture is to the soil, and, that it can actually be financially viable, which I think is very important. So give us, if someone just cannot afford organic, is organic best always, or maybe the dirty dozen, or just something like very simple that people can go through? Because I think most, of our audience knows that it's important to at least, do as much organic as possible, but some people have a budget. What is Dr. Jill's sort of priority list?
Yeah, so you mentioned it. Environmental Working Group is a nonprofit that puts out every year the Dirty Dozen. And these are the 12 most contaminated foods with mycotoxins as far as fruits and vegetables. So that's where you want to put your money, because those are going to be like usually strawberries, bell peppers, some of my favorites top the list. So for example, if I'm traveling, which I do a lot to speak, and they have beautiful strawberries on the breakfast table for me, I know most of the time they're not organic. And if they aren't, I'm not going to eat those strawberries, because I know that it's like literally almost not always number one or number two on the list of heavily sprayed. Now, if I'm purchasing things, berries is one thing I will purchase organic. Bananas, which you can peel, avocados, which you can peel, typically are not as affected, or if they are, you can peel off the outside. So any peelable fruit, you could buy conventional and get away with it. Or if you look at the Clean 15, those are the ones that are going to be more likely to not have pesticides or exposure. Other things that are hidden exposures are coffee and chocolate. They're very highly sprayed and they're often contain mycotoxins. And I always joke, coffee and chocolate, two of my favorite food groups, right? They're really, really good. They have caffeine in them. And, it's interesting. Caffeine is enhancing to things that we do when we are drinking caffeine or eating caffeine. It enhances our like of that. So it's no wonder coffee and chocolate are so popular.
Yeah.
All that to say, they're highly contaminated. So those would be two things you want to get: organic coffee, organic chocolate, if at all possible, because they're going to be likely more contaminated.
Brilliant. And let's finish air. I mean, looking at air filters and, this Air Angel, they sent me an Air Angel out. I'm trying to just get the name here. It's like a photocatalytic oxidation unit. It's a polar ionization unit, HEPA filters. Maybe give us your sort of like expert opinion on how important it is for everyone to have one of these air filters.
Oh, this is so important as well. And I love that you're talking about details because let's start with basic HEPA filtration is particulate, and it's going to be the larger particulate. So if we take the example of mold, let's talk about mold because the spores are going to be filtered out by a HEPA filter. Those are larger particulate. And the spores, if we breathe them in, they may go a little into our lungs, but they're not going to get very far. They're large. They're not going to diffuse in the alveoli. So granted, they're toxic. They're not great, but those are going to be filtered by the HEPA filtration system, which you could have like a furnace filter in your home, and you could have a higher grade, like a MERV rating is one example of how they grade it. And the higher the number, the less particulate will go through. You can actually get an air filter for your furnace that has charcoal embedded. And now we're getting to VOCs. So there's HEPA filtration. And like all the filters I have here in my condo and at my office are HEPA plus VOC. How you get VOCs. Now, these are more like 2.5 microns and below. It's formaldehyde, it's smoke, it's the mycotoxins. So the toxins the mold spores produce, which are very tiny. These particulate at 2.5, or say post wildfire, same thing, this small particulate, which is soot and fumes and things, it can go directly into the lungs through the alveoli without any transport. That's why it's so much more toxic, because as we inhale it, there is no barrier that is good enough for that small 2.5 microns or below. And we inhale and it goes directly into the alveoli, and the alveoli is made to get oxygen to the blood. So guess what's next? Right to our bloodstream. So literally within 5 seconds of being in a moldy home, if you're sensitive like me, I can inhale that and I can have a physical effect in the bloodstream within seconds because the VOCs pass so quickly through the lung, and typically lung exposure. So when you're looking at filtration, you always want at least HEPA plus VOC. And Austin Air, IQ Air, there's a bunch of good ones out there. Air Doctor, those are the top 3 that I use, but there's more. There's many, many more. But you want to make sure it's not just HEPA, it's HEPA plus VOC. Now, the technology you're talking about is a whole nother level. It's ionization. This is good and bad, and I want to talk to people about this. The good is a lot of times in hospitals or systems, they'll install a ultraviolet filter where the literally radiation is affecting the ionization of those particulates and getting rid of them, and it kills viruses. The downside, however, is even if they don't produce ozone, which most of them say on the manufacturer it has no ozone production, the reaction that happens in the air with that particulate and that ionizing radiation can create ozone. And for someone with sensitive lungs like I was after the mold exposure, that actually irritates my lungs. So that kind of filtration would burn my lungs if I was in a room with that filter growing. Now, that's not everyone, because it's a really high quality filtration system. But if you have sensitive lungs or have had a mold exposure, or you have an SOD mutation, which is a type of mutation that causes oxidative stress when you're exposed to reactive oxygen, those kinds of things, which I'm one of those, you will not feel well if you have the type of filter you're mentioning, because it'll cause ozone in the particulate in the air, and you're going to breathe that in, and that ozone is going to be irritating to your lungs.
Sure, that is a comprehensive explanation on air filters, and I think we try to get Air Doctor in the country. It just wasn't feasible, but for South Africans and Africans, probably going to get their Air Angel in and see what happens with those that are sensitive to it.
Yes.
Let's talk about Unexpected, your book. I think it's a courageous, story. Let's talk about your documentary. You become an actress. You've really gone big. You've had a budget. And I really want to just spend a little bit of time with your backstory, how I don't like the word survivor, breast cancer survivor. You're a thriver,
Yes,
You're a Crohn's thriver, not just a survivor. So give us a little bit about your backstory, this new documentary, because I think education, I always say to the community, are made to thrive. Doctor comes from the Latin docere, which means teacher. We're not only interventionists, we're here to teach and to empower and not enslave people to any supplement or any drug or any process, but to give freedom and to declare freedom for people. So tell us a little bit about your story, Dr. Jill.
I love where you're going with each one of these. And what I just thought of as you were saying is our most powerful asset is not our food, it's not our pills, it's our mind and it's our heart, which when I say heart, I mean our intuitive sense about what's the right direction for us to go. And it's the combination. We can't use one at the exclusion of the other. And you can almost think of like right brain, left brain. Even for me, the unexpected finding resilience through functional medicine, science, and faith. It's like taking both things that are dichotomous and seeing that they don't go together and saying, but wait, we can have both. And it's masculine and feminine, it's right brain, it's left brain, it's analytical mind and heart based. And you need both. And I just frame that because if you're listening to this, you may not be able to afford all the latest supplements. You may not be able to afford a $1,000 air filter in your home or whatever it is, but you can change your mind, your mindset, and you can trust your heart and intuition and love yourself. And at the core, these things that we already have in our bodies are the most powerful healing tools. It's all about thriving. And I also love that you framed, it's funny because when I think about surviving cancer and surviving mold, I don't even equate, like, I'm like, oh yeah, I did have cancer, but there's no identity in that. And I think that's really important because when we identify as, I don't eat gluten, I don't smoke, I don't drink, or whatever things, there's nothing wrong or right about these things, but our identity drives our behaviors and our habits, and it drives where we're headed. So I just know I thrive, I'm resilient, I'm so strong, I can overcome anything, but I never think about the fact that I had cancer. I never identify with that. And I think that's part of the win is I never got attached to that. I never got attached to being, and there's nothing wrong if you are, but if you start to de-identify with that and think of it as a journey, and you talked about a teacher and doctor as teacher, what happened is I learned that cancer was one of my greatest teachers. Crohn's was one of my greatest teachers. Some of my difficult relationships were my greatest teachers. And if you can view everything, it's all mindset. If you can view everything that comes your way, even tragedy and difficulty, I'm not saying it's not painful. I'm not saying there's not suffering. So I want to acknowledge that. But the truth is, every single thing that comes into our life can have purpose and meaning and teach us. And that's the framework of my book. I took all the stuff I'd been through. 25 years old, suddenly third year medical student, aggressive breast cancer. It killed all of my friends under 40, and I'm the only one still surviving. I go on 6 months later to be diagnosed with aggressive Crohn's disease, another life-threatening illness I was told is incurable. You're going to have to be drugs all your life. And then my doc said diet has nothing to do with it. And I went on to say, this can't be true. And literally within 2 weeks of changing my diet, my Crohn's symptoms abated. And I started to discover the gut immune interface and discover the power of diet and lifestyle and supplements and nutrition on the Crohn's. And within several years, I was completely cured of breast cancer and completely healed of Crohn's. And then I went on to thrive, started practice in Boulder, Colorado, and my office flooded. And I became very, very sick from mold toxicity.
Wow.
Didn't know what it was, didn't know how it affected. My brain was affected, my body, my skin, my immune system. It was horrendous. And I always say it was almost worse than cancer because I looked okay on the outside and no one understood it. So there wasn't near the compassion or understanding. Cancer people know. I lost all my hair. I had chemotherapy. That was easy, and that was easy relative. And I also say the treatment for cancer is what I've been recovering from ever since because I would not do anything different. It saved my life. But I had 3 drug chemotherapy to the maximum dose that wouldn't stop my heart from beating, like all the way up to what's the dose she can tolerate before she'll get congestive heart failure, and 3 drugs that caused immune deficiency and everything. And it cured me from cancer. I have no regrets. But for the last 20 years, what I've been doing with my body and my heart and my mind is healing from some of the effects they had from those really toxic drugs that cured me from cancer. So then I went on to mold and became a mold expert because I had to heal from that. And the journey isn't over. And I used to tell my story when I stand up in front of doctors and say, I healed from breast cancer, I healed from Crohn's, and everything's great. And the truth is the journey continues and I still have challenges. But you know what I know now is why your podcast is here, Made to Thrive. I love that title. It's all about resilience. And when we have the mindset that we know that we're going to have the resources we need in the time that we need them for anything that comes our way, it's pretty powerful because we have this confidence in that process. And over my time as the guinea pig for all these illnesses, I have developed a deep confidence and I have a deep faith too. So there's a bigger picture here, like my greater purpose and meaning in life matters. And all of those things allow me to come to this life with hope and with healing for people who are listening. And really, this is not about me. This is not about my story. It is, but what my real desire is for you as a reader, viewer, or listener today, to see yourselves in our story and to find your peace and meaning in that story and to find your resilience, because you all have the same tools that I had. And I just want to be an encouragement to the world. So that book is coming out March 7th. So excited about that. And it really, again, I just want it to be a reflection and an encouragement in the fact that I've been through that. And it's a story, but there's tons of practical sidebars on how to heal from mold, how to heal from Crohn's, what to do. So real practical tips. And then the crazy thing happened as the pandemic started and we all were sitting in our homes and being isolated. I was sitting in my chair on January 1st, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, and my book was being written. And I just thought, you know what? Everybody switched to screens. So many people I know during the pandemic are watching Netflix and binging and sitting in front of screens. Nothing wrong with that. But I thought, I want to touch the world. I want to inspire the world. If I want to inspire the world, I need to be on screens. And it's so funny. I mean, Steve, I have no clue what I'm doing in any of this. And I have no clue. I've never produced a movie. I've never acted. I've never done any of this. But that day, I had a very divine, clear guidance. I know what I'm doing. And within a week, I talked to different people and I had a director interested, a producer interested, an executive assistant. And I said, well, guys, let's do this. We just need a budget. We need some money. And again, I had this hope and desire. And I had this knowledge that if I move forward with a vision, things will come, right? That's how it manifests. And I had no doubt. I didn't know how. And I didn't know what I was doing. But what I did is put that intention and that vision out there. And the vision really was for the purpose of loving people and encouraging people. I don't care if I never make a penny, and I put a lot of money out to do the book because I don't care about the money. What I do care about is inspiring people.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we had a budget. And within 3 months, I met a investor on a Zoom call and I said, what do I have to lose? I pitched the documentary. He invested. We had our budget. And the following year we filmed for 12, maybe 14 months. Wow. And now it's finished. It's being submitted to film festivals. The distribution is still up in the air. So we're going to see if it'll either be like an event in a theater or if it'll be a Netflix, kind of exclusive, and time will tell. Right now, if people want to see the trailer, drpatientmovie.com has the trailer. You can check it out. And we'll be sharing where it'll be viewed in the future.
Well done. What a story, from pain to purpose, all your pain points, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. I think that's probably the epitome, which I love. But 2 last questions. I always sort of ask this along the journey of someone like yourself, who is Dr. Jill Carnahan? When I say who is, SteveStavs, SteveStavs is a redeemed spirit being that's living in this tent, in this body, changing and transforming lives. But who is Dr. Jill Carnahan?
Oh, in a way, it's easy. I am not perfect. I'm far from successful every single day, but my desire is to be manifestation of love in the world, because I think love is where healing starts. And I had to go through the journey of learning to re-love myself, because a lot of the autoimmunity that comes in our lives is attack of self. And metaphorically, it's self-loathing or self-hatred or not trusting our intuition. I had to go through my own journey of learning to trust myself, my intuition, and loving myself. And now my desire is to be able to pour that out to the world, because that unconditional love is the envelope, or it's the container where people can start to heal, where they feel free to really be themselves and be accepted. And if there's anything our world needs, it's unconditional love.
Beautiful. And I know that you're an incredible human being and you've lived this life with the right mindset. But something I want to ask you, Dr. Jill, is a lot of people struggle to do it, by themselves. We really believe in health coaching. It's in its infancy here in South Africa. How important it is to have someone walk alongside you or form a circle around you. What is your view on the future of health coaching? I mean, a lot of functional medicine docs like ourselves, we're very busy, and there's long waiting lists and there's costs that people can't really afford. Tell us about health coaching and your view on it.
I think in fact, just this morning I read an article from Entrepreneur, and it said the top 10 careers, and 3 of them, one was like a software person. The top 2, 3, and 4 were nurse practitioner, health coach, and PA. And those are all like paramedical, and they're just as valuable as MDs. So there's no value thing here. Yeah. But what happens with these mid-level and with the health coaching is anyone in that realm is it allows there's more people coming alongside. And if there's anything that patients and people need in general, it's someone to be that, often we are either in our lives with motivation and habits. Some people can by themselves. There's probably 10% of people that set a goal in their mind and they just go to it and do it, done. They don't need help. But the other 90%
Mm.
need an encourager, need someone to pick them up when they fall down, need someone to even give them advice on how to implement habits. And health coaching is a very affordable, wonderful way for someone to come alongside, even like you see me and I give you a plan and then you're like overwhelmed. What do I do? Right. And that's where a health coach can come in and say, okay, start with this day number 1. And next week you add this. And this is the order of supplements and how you take them. I want you to call me next week and tell me if you've had some troubles. What's your roadblocks? Are you getting enough sleep? They're doing the practical day-to-day guiding where the patient can really get that value from a coach. I'm a huge fan.
Brilliant. Well, I want to declare favor and blessing over you, Dr. Jill Carnahan. I know you've been through a lot. We didn't get to speak about all the emotional toxicity and psychological toxicity and mental toxicity. Maybe we can do that in part 2. We're really going to just promote your book as best as we can, Unexpected, plus the docu-series. We'll check that out. I think it's just imperative with physicians, with people, with all the health coaches at Made to Thrive. So thank you so much. Just sending lots of love, lots of blessing. You know, we're miles away, but there's just a connection that I just think that we probably connect in the future. So wonderful, wonderful blessing. You have a beautiful soul, and just look forward to connecting in the future.
Thank you for having me. It has been an absolute joy.